The latest edition of the Jim Schwartz annual lecture series. Jim Schwartz was past president who brought the Historical Society forward in many areas, both in terms of programming and finances and looking to the future, and we honor him by naming this lecture series after him. Today we are fortunate to have Dr. Hannah Lebovits, who is an assistant professor of public affairs and urban planning at the University of Texas at Arlington. She is a seasoned qualitative researcher and a prolific writer whose work has appeared in peer-reviewed journals and books as well as public media outlets. Her interdisciplinary research focuses on socially sustainable community development. Her community-based research methods enable her to be deeply engaged in the public sphere, providing expert analysis and commentary, and to generate grassroots research and service projects. Hannah received her PhD from Cleveland State University and lives in Dallas with her husband and 2 children, and we are delighted to welcome her today for what I know is a very interesting topic because I heard it presented at the Southern Jewish Historical Society Conference. Where did the Shtetel go? Investigating Orthodox Jewish self-erasure in Dallas, Texas.
All right, so first of all, thank you so much to DJHS for inviting me. My phone is on silent, but I'd like to keep it right here so I can check my time. I don't want anybody thinking I'm being intentionally rude, especially young people and their cell phones, so just so you all know, it's just here so I can check my time. So, as Deborah mentioned, I gave a version of this talk, a much more shortened, abridged version of this talk at the Southern Jewish Historical Society Conference in October. And since then, Deborah's given me an opportunity to come back to it and actually rethink about it over and over again and conceptualize it more broadly. And I'm really excited now today to share it with you. Before I step in, I just want to make a general disclaimer, which is that every time we talk about history, we have individual history and we have communal history. And our personal individual histories often combine together and integrate together into a communal history and a communal story or a communal phenomenon. And the work I do is all about finding those larger phenomenon and deciding where they come from and how they come from, and broadly what we call investigating. So I don't want anyone to walk away from this talk and think, she didn't talk about my personal history, or she doesn't know enough, because I want to keep learning and I want to keep investigating with all of you. So at the end, I do give my email address, and I really encourage everyone to reach out to me, and also, when we have a little schmooze time at the end, I'd love to hear from you all as well, because the more that we understand individual histories, we do understand communal histories. But if your personal history is not represented, that means there's more data out there, there are more things we need to talk about, and I really want to engage in more conversations. Okay, so general disclaimer, because sometimes it gets really personal, and I really understand it, people want to see themselves. So I want to find ways we can always see ourselves together. So first of all, a little bit of an introduction. I don't actually study this topic all the time. This is a side project. How did I come to study this? Well, unlike most people who do not grow up in Dallas and who are transplants from the north, unlike those folks, I actually knew about Dallas Jewish history before I knew about Dallas regular history. Not because I read about it in a book, but because when I told people I was moving to Dallas, the first question they asked was, are you moving to the south or the north? And I didn't know what that meant. So I looked up South Dallas, and I found out about all of this history of Jews in South Dallas. Well, it turned out that these Orthodox folks were asking me, are you moving to the South Eruv or the North Eruv? Are you going to live in North Dallas or far North Dallas? I didn't know that, so I investigated all of Southern Dallas Jewish history before I even knew that there were Jews living in far North Dallas or Plano. So that's how this project got started, and somehow I came to this realizing that we had a massive history and no one who I was talking to seemed to know about it or seemed to be interested in it. And when I finally did move here in June 2020, I started meeting a lot of Orthodox Jews who, like me, were transplants from other areas, who didn't seem to have any connection to the broad and long Orthodox Jewish Dallas history. So, being the person I was and having a couple of weeks of research on them, I decided to start educating them and talking to them about it, and it really became a pet project that I became more and more and more invested in. And as I started to think about this a lot more, I kept hearing people say things like, there were no Orthodox Jews in Dallas before 1990, or there was no Orthodoxy in this city before these people came. And knowing that that was incorrect, I started to wonder why we didn't have a stronger preservation of Orthodox Jewish history here. So that's where this talk comes from. And again, I really want to know more. I have a thirst for this, partially because I like to sound smarter than other people, but really because I want to know and I want to understand, but I also want us to think about the future. Because I'm a young person, I have young kids. My young kids already know they're going to be forced to live here in Dallas. They have no option. They will move back home. They will live right down the block. It's already been decided. They already know. As it is, moving down the block is a little far. I really want them in my backyard. I want to build a nice ADU. We'll move out there. We have a whole plan. But my kids already, I want them to be, generations of Texans. And so I want to instill in them this idea of preserving our history, our Orthodox Jewish history for the long term. So there's a couple reasons I want to do this. And again, I really want to hear more from you all. So in overview of this talk, first we're going to talk a little bit about just kind of how spaces develop, how we think about neighborhoods, particularly how we think about Orthodox Jewish neighborhoods and how Orthodox Jewish people tend to think about their space. It's not that Orthodox Jews are that significantly different from other Jews, and in fact, I want us to see a lot more commonalities than we often see, but there are certain tendencies that make space differently and that create and recreate space in different ways that will set the stage for when we talk about that self-erasure. After we discuss that, we're going to discuss the concept of urban preservation, urban erasure, talk a little bit about what Orthodox Jewish life was like in Dallas prior to the 1990s, this long and very rich Orthodox Jewish tradition, and then we're going to get into investigating the reasons why it hasn't been preserved. So as a social scientist, I'm not a humanities scholar or a historian. I try to understand why people do the things they do. Not just what has happened, but why. We're going to talk about different reasons why things have happened. We're going to talk about interactions between those different reasons. I'm going to critique myself before any of you can jump in and critique me. And then we're going to wrap it all up and talk about the future. It would be great if folks could save their questions until the end. But if you have a burning question and you just need to jump up and ask it, go for it. Because honestly, I'm a professor, and anytime a student just needs to jump in, I encourage it. So if you have a question that you need to pop and just yell out at me, go for it. Last thing, nodders. You are the God's gift to the world. Please, if you like something, nod, lean in. It gives me encouragement. It keeps me going. I am here in 3-inch heels. I could fall over any minute. It's the nodders who are still going to keep me going, okay? So please feel free when you get into something, nod, lean in, look at me. If you're not into it, shake your head, encourage me, okay? I have 2 children. I need it. I need that encouragement to keep going. So whose neighborhood is it anyway? When we talk about Jewish neighborhoods, when we talk about the Shtetl, we have to start from the question of how do we even have a Jewish neighborhood? How do we figure out whose neighborhood belongs to someone? And so I've actually done a lot of research into this concept because it's a contested idea. Sometimes we look at, well, what are the percentages of people? So we might call something a Hispanic neighborhood if the percentage of people who live there identify as Hispanic. We might look at the people who run that neighborhood. So if there are certain city council members that represent that district and they look a certain way or they act a certain way, we'll say that's their neighborhood. But I tend to think about neighborhoods as being determined by 3 basic things. Buildings, right? What are the buildings? What do they represent? What do they provide for that neighborhood? Branding. What are the expressions of public art, of public identity that are in that space? And boundaries. Where are the boundaries of that neighborhood and who decides those boundaries? And so when we think about a Jewish neighborhood, we think about something being a Jewish neighborhood, we're talking about Jewish buildings and Jewish institutions. We're talking about public expressions of Judaism. And we're talking about boundaries that are self-determined by the Jewish neighborhood, right? By the Jewish folks who are there. So historic preservation is something that we often engage in when we identify, who belongs to a neighborhood and whose neighborhood belongs to whom. We often engage in this cycle of historic preservation. The official process of historic preservation in the US really only came into being in the beginning of the 20th century. Prior to that, there wasn't a lot of public support, as in public dollars, at the state, federal, and local level to preserve history. Because old things very often were seen as being in poor condition and not really worth preserving, especially for a lot of immigrants who didn't really want to preserve their old histories of their tenement buildings or their poor conditions they lived in. And there was this idea that brand new things, that's the ideal. And then we started to recognize that there was a lot of architecture, there was a lot of communal history, there was a lot of identity that's not being preserved. And we engaged in this massive process from the state, federal, local level, to fund historic preservation. And historic preservation has a couple of really strong impacts. So it has a physical impact very often. Very often buildings can actually be renovated and reused, which is physically really good for the neighborhood. They already fit into the neighborhood, they're already useful for the neighborhood, it creates neighborhood sustainability. But it can also have an economic impact. A lot of people like to come to neighborhoods that feel authentic. There's a lot of research on this, and this is part of why we have so many people moving back to certain neighborhoods, because they want that authenticity of a place that has that architecture that was older, it has a design that was older, it has some parks or some identity that's older. It also has a social impact. There's a lot of social cohesion that we have in older neighborhoods that was destroyed over time because of rapid development. And when we preserve those areas, we preserve those social relationships, those social connections, and that social identity. There's a civic impact to historic preservation. People care about their neighborhoods when they can stay in them longer. They are more civically engaged. They care more about what's going on around them when we preserve. But there's also a personal impact. So people have a personal level of what we call ontological security. They need to know that their life sort of makes sense and follows a certain trajectory. And when we preserve history and when we preserve people's individual realities, we allow them to hold on to that sense of who they are. If you can live in the same neighborhood throughout your life, you have a very strong sense of your personal security, your personal knowledge of who you are, how your life has come together. So there's a very personal impact to historic preservation as well. Today, when we talk about historic preservation, there are three really common streams in the literature, in the research, and also in the political and advocacy space. One of them is urban development or urban redevelopment. We already have a lot of spaces that are built up. And in a place like Dallas, we've sprawled really far out. And so there's a lot of talk about re-preserving the places we already have and maintaining those rather than continuing to build out and allowing the core to fall apart. Especially in a place like Dallas, if we allow the downtown to fall apart, what are people from those outer areas going to come into downtown for? Nothing, right? So we lose our core, we lose the metropolitan area. I used to live in Cleveland, and this is actually a big problem there. The Cleveland city and downtown, barely anyone goes there anymore because there aren't even that many amenities. Not even, there aren't that many housing amenities. There's not really that much drawing you to Cleveland downtown, which makes the city very poor and keeps the city very poor and makes the outer line areas of the county more resource rich but difficult to get to, right? So it's even from a metropolitan development perspective, urban preservation is important. Then we have that communal identity aspect. Over the last 50 years, we've seen a lot of community groups re-engaging with their space and wanting to preserve their space and engage in the sort of communal identity politics and advocacy that comes with saying, this is my neighborhood, this is where I live, this is where I'm invested. And then there's actually an environmental function that historic preservation has as well. There's a large environmental impact to creating new development that very often we can preserve the environmental impact by just preserving spaces that are already there. So we can keep more areas that are pervious surfaces, areas that are green, areas that actually help with our natural ecology by engaging in historic preservation of buildings that we've already built. So why do we preserve something? What do we preserve? How do we preserve it? It really depends, again, on that building, branding, and boundaries aspect. So the easiest thing to preserve typically when we think about a community preserving itself are those buildings, right? Keeping those big physical structures. That's typically what we think about, preserving those, preserving a synagogue, preserving a school, preserving something that's a big building. But we also need to preserve community identity. I recently visited California, I visited LA, the old Boyle Heights neighborhood, which is where the Jews used to live in LA, actually where my father was born. And as I was walking through the street with my kids, someone came over to me and called me a gentrifier. And as it so happened to be, first of all, I wasn't buying property there or anything, I was just visiting. But I was actually right near the Great Synagogue at that time. And I pointed up at the synagogue and I said, I don't think so. My father had his circumcision right there, so that's not me. And so there's a communal identity that needs to be preserved in places, knowing Jews used to live here, or this was the historic Jewish neighborhood. There's an identity aspect to it too. But then we have that boundaries aspect, which is that our communal boundaries don't often overlap with other forms of boundaries like council districts or other forms of neighborhood boundaries. So we don't always have the power, the jurisdictional power, to engage in preservation. So the questions of why, what, and how get really complicated when we think about these physical spaces that at various points in time were really significant, but don't actually track very easily with what we're going to preserve or how we want to preserve it. Particularly in the Orthodox community, which is what we're going to talk about today, this is a very strong question as there's constant change in a community too. So when you have a lot of new people who come into a place, and this is true of Dallas in general, you have a lot of new folks who have moved here in the last 30, 40 years, they don't really have any connection to these old communities. So they have no reason to think about what to preserve, why to preserve, how to preserve it, because they don't actually have a foundation in it at all. So when we think about what to preserve, how to preserve, why to preserve, it's really important that we think about the opposite question, which is what drives me, which is why don't we preserve things? Because just as much as there's a reason why we do or how we do, there are real reasons why we don't. Sometimes it appears to be very passive and simplistic, but even that comes from a place that we can identify a phenomenon, a theme, understand it better. I'm just one of those people who every time someone asks, let's do this, I say, why should we not do that? So I'm sort of the devil's advocate. So this really drives me as a research question because I always want to know why something is not there. That gets to the idea of self-erasure, which is a really interesting concept that we don't talk about nearly enough. Most erasure is what we call forced erasure. There are reasons why a community's history is gone or rewritten or reconceptualized. It's usually because other parties have some level of control over that history. So, for example, many of the war crimes that occurred in Germany during the Holocaust there was a process of forced erasure from the state. They did not release many of their records for 50 years until the 90s, when we were finally able to understand what Germany had done and how they had done it, what were some of the details of that. That was forced erasure for our community, for our Jewish community, right? We could not understand our own history. But then there's self-erasure, like my grandparents coming to America after the Holocaust and refusing to talk about their experiences, where they themselves decide, we're not going to go back there, we're not going to talk about it, our children will never know about it. So that's the difference between forced erasure and self-erasure. So when we define the concept, it has to do with erasure of identity, of history, of memory that is controlled by the individual who experienced it. So there's people who have experienced Orthodox Jewish Dallas who themselves did not preserve it. That's what we're talking about today. But then it develops into a larger conversation because as communities have new identities and new extensions of themselves, there's also a communal effort to not engage in this preservation. There's a communal self-erasure as well. And so today, when we discuss this concept, I want you all to think about all of the various reasons I'm going to give, but also your own sort of sense of erasure, of self-erasure, of the history of Jews in Dallas, where it's coming from, why it's happening, but also how we can combat it. So, Orthodox community and spatial narratives in Southern Jewish history. Tagline, there's not a lot. There really is not a lot of preservation of Orthodox Jewish history in Southern Jewish history. Most of the academic history books do not focus on Orthodox or even broadly what we might call religious observance in Jewish history, in Southern Jewish history. And a lot of the emphasis is on Southern Jewish, broader Southern Jewish communal and spatial patterns, as well as individuals who have been involved in Southern Jewish politics, Southern Jewish civics, Southern Jewish business and economic endeavors. There's sort of a what we might call secularized approach to looking at Jewish history in the South. It's not very much engaged with religious identity, but it's not even really engaging so much in a broader communal identity. It's much more focused on specific Southern Jewish individuals and what they've accomplished and what they've achieved, and not so much these broader communal histories. Here in Dallas, we have a combination. So we do have some talk of Orthodox Jewish history in Dallas, but we also are really lacking in our broader conversations, our broader understanding. So there's a lot of institution building that happened here in Dallas in the Orthodox Jewish community. And when I say institution building, I mean what we call machlokes. A lot of fighting, a lot of infighting. A lot of people who had, there was a shul here with 30 members, and then there became a second shul with 15 members, and then there became a third shul with another 10 members, right? We had a lot of breakoffs, a lot of massive institution building. But what that created was actually a pretty diverse community of Orthodox Jews that were at what we might call various levels or various points in the spectrum of religiosity, but still maintaining Orthodox identity, self-identified Orthodox identity. And what that means is that their social and communal norms revolved around not engaging in certain activities on the Sabbath. So even if they had to work, they might still walk to synagogue, or there were certain Sabbath observations. There were a lot of ritual holiday observances beyond just Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah. Passover was a big one, which right now I can say it's a huge endeavor, and we're coming up on that. But identifying resources for Passover, being able to get the right meat, the right matzah, all of those things, those were big endeavors in the Orthodox Jewish history. There was a lot of Orthodox Jewish educational institution building that was, again, part of the social and cultural norm. If you sent your children to public school, which most people did, there wasn't really a day school movement at that time, you sent your children to Sunday school. That was what you did, and they learned Hebrew, and they had bar mitzvahs, and this crossed over not just the Orthodox spectrum, but in the Orthodox community, that was the standard. That was part of your identification as Orthodox. We also had a lot of Orthodox Jews that were engaged in moving around the area. So many of them physically settled in what we call Goose Valley or Little Mexico now, originally, because especially the Eastern European Jews that were not very wealthy at all, the Goose Valley area, which was north of South Dallas, so it's what we call today Old North Dallas. The Goose Valley area,
Fair Park.
Yeah, so well I know above Fair Park. So north of Fair Park. So Goose Valley and Little Mexico, I don't have a good map in here because sometimes when you blow them up, they're not so clear. So I'm gonna use my hands here, like we're in second grade. So we have Goose Valley up here in the north, and then we had Deep Elm south of that, and then South Dallas was below that. And so South Dallas had Fair Park, which is where many of the synagogues were, but some of the original Orthodox Jewish settlement was in Goose Valley because they couldn't afford to live in South Dallas yet. And so folks came to Goose Valley, and then they were able to move south after they became a little more economically secure. Some of the Orthodox Jewish institutions originally were in Goose Valley and then moved to South Dallas. And we're going to talk about this soon, but it actually is it very much is similar to today if we look at the Orthodox Jewish community being in North Dallas, far North Dallas, and Plano. So we do sort of see these like typical kind of three-step progressions in a lot of communities. And so the physical settlement, again, many of them started, these Eastern European Jews, many of them started physically separate from where the established German Jewish community was in South Dallas, and were only able to move there several years later or a generation later when they were more economically advanced. So that's kind of I don't want to say the long and short, it's much more deep than that, but those are the highlights of Orthodox Jewish history in Dallas. But remember how I started off my talk. I did all of this research into South Dallas, thinking that was where a lot of Orthodox Jews lived, right? And then I found no one was there. And not only were no Orthodox Jews there were no Orthodox Jewish buildings, no Orthodox Jewish identification. I actually spend a lot of time in South Dallas now because I research affordable housing and homelessness in Dallas. I do a lot of research in that space. So I spend a lot of time in South Dallas, and let me tell you, there's nothing Orthodox Jewish about South Dallas today, right? So all of these things were happening at that time. There were massive institution buildings, social norms, physical resettlement, but it's not there anymore. It's really not. And not only is it not there, but it's not here in DJHS either. When you go into DJHS, there's not a very rich Orthodox Jewish history either there. So we're lacking it here, and so we need to talk about why and where that's coming from. So the first thing that I think about when I think about preserving history, and sorry, there's a lot of words on the slide, you can ignore it, just look at me. So the first thing I think about is that for people who are Orthodox and who observe many of these religious and communal norms, the spaces that they live in are determined by these rituals. And what I mean is that the physical settlement around them is not simply for the physical space, but it actually produces a ritual purpose. So where you go to pray, for example, it's not just about the building, it's about the path that you take from your home to that building, which other Orthodox Jewish families you pass, what you're going to walk through, what do you walk through the main street or do you try to take side streets because it's the Sabbath and you're going to observe it that way. So there's a way that we think about our space that isn't just about the physical features, because so much of Orthodox Judaism is about keeping rituals and maintaining rituals. So figuring out where you're going to find your food is about where exactly is the kosher butcher, not which store is least expensive. So there's a different way that we think about our space. And so when I talk about this, I think, when is a wall not a wall? When it's an eruv. So if you're an Orthodox Jew and you abide by the eruv, which is basically a boundary, a physical boundary around an area that allows you to carry on the Sabbath, that means that there are certain walls, there are certain posts, there are certain poles, telephone wires that aren't just those things. They're an eruv. They're a ritual object that also dictates where you go and how you go. My husband and daughter are actually here in the back, and my daughter, when she thinks about her neighborhood, and we've talked about this, she thinks about the eruv. Because on Shabbos, that's when we walk mostly, and so she thinks about, well, where can I go? Where do my friends live? It's our eruv. So her concept of living in North Dallas or far North Dallas is determined by her ritual urbanism, the way she acts and the way she is in space. She's the only kid here, so I just figured I'd give her a shout out. So, yay! So why is there self-erasure of the Orthodox Jewish history here in Dallas? Why haven't we preserved it? And I say we because I identify myself as a person who's a part of this, right? I'm in this community now, I'm Orthodox. What am I doing to preserve my history? What should I be more engaged in? And why have the folks before me not engaged in more preservation of this history? So we're going to talk about 3 different streams. And the reason I do this, so actually Deborah's only heard the last one. So this will be exciting for her also. We're going to talk about 3 different streams. And the reason that I do this is because different things hit different with different people. Something might resonate, something might not resonate. You might find something that makes sense to you, you might find something else that doesn't make sense to you. So I like to give people options. It's like when we offer our kids a couple different vegetables so they can't say they're starving and they have nothing to eat. So I want to give us a couple different streams, but I'm also going to talk about how they interact with one another and also some critique of each one. So the first one is what we call political economic shifts. So there's massive shifts in immigrant communities. They come to a place, they're really poor, they're resource poor, they're economically poor, and that changes over time for many groups. And so that can explain some level of self-erasure. Then we have the material culture lens. And what we mean by material culture is the fact that sometimes there's an identity culture and there's a spatial culture, but there's also a material culture. And the material culture of Orthodox Judaism, because it's so focused on ritual, very often isn't only built out of buildings and branding and boundary, but it's homes, and it's actual items that exist in homes, and it's Torah scrolls, and it's books, and it's mezuzahs, and it's all of these material elements of the culture, which when they move, it's not going to make big waves, but they're going to be preserved in a different kind of way. And then there's what we call the community ecology lens. The community ecology lens is this idea that different communities go through different phases. And as they go through various phases and different experiences, there are different incentives to preserve or to erase different elements of those phases. So, for example, when we get into this, we're going to talk a little bit about this sort of revival or Baal Teshuvah movement that's happened here in Dallas, and how many new Orthodox people have come into the Orthodox community, creating a new phase of the community and a different reason why there might be some self-erasure. So the political economic shifts are really about urban mobility. The American dream emphasizes urban mobility. Unlike other countries where a lot of the economic dream of that country is actually stability, to stay where your family's been for generations, the American dream is about urban mobility, moving away from the old neighborhood you were in. Becoming an adult involves leaving home. You have to go somewhere else to have these sort of coming of age experiences. And ultimately, the American dream is built out of being in a better economic condition than people before you, which in many ways means physically moving to somewhere else. So the political economic shift that happens in the immigrant community here in Dallas, all of these Eastern European Jews come, they hold on to their Orthodox religious affiliation, but they become more economically successful and want to match their urban mobility progression with their economic progression. They want to move to a new neighborhood. And what happens when you have that progression is you're not really interested in preserving your old neighborhood where you were poor and sad. You're just not. You don't have a lot of interest in that. You don't want to talk about that. You don't want to hold on to that. Because even though it was very meaningful to you at the time, now that you've advanced economically, particularly for immigrants, now that you've assimilated into American culture, you don't really have a desire to hold on to your past version of self. And so, even though Orthodox Jews did not assimilate religiously, and they held on to their religious identity and their Jewish identification, some of them did assimilate, but even the ones we're talking about here, right, those that hold on to Orthodoxy, even while they might not have chosen to assimilate religiously, they still assimilated economically and politically to better conditions. So they don't want to preserve their historical, political, and economic condition. They want to maintain their religious practice in a different place. Another element of this political economic aspect is that there were a lot of tensions in these neighborhoods, Goose Valley, Deep Elm, and South Dallas, happening over the first half of the 20th century. There were a lot of new racial tensions, a lot of new economic tensions, and a lot of new ethnic tensions that introduced new concerns of the community that, again, did not make them want to be tied to their old neighborhoods that were now predominantly Black or Hispanic, that not seeing yourself in the people that live there impacts your desire to preserve that space. Not necessarily because you're a racist or you're xenophobic, but it just doesn't represent you anymore. It's a different group, it's a different ethnic group, a different social group that lives there, and so you don't really have a desire to hold on to that. When we talk about the material culture lens, this is the idea that tradition, and which is a huge emphasis in Orthodox Judaism and in all Judaism, but strongly in Orthodox Judaism through a religious, specifically religious lens, it's passed through people and practices and not places. So if we're kicked out of Hungary, if we're kicked out of Poland, if we're kicked out of Israel, wherever we are, it doesn't matter. We don't need to preserve those things because we preserve them by passing this on to people and by processes and rituals and practices and not by staying connected to a place. So you already have this bias of people coming from Eastern Europe already thinking, wherever I am, meh, it doesn't really matter, right? Whoever I am, I'll be a Jew. Wherever I am, I'm a Jew, I'm a Jew, I'm a Jew. So because of that material culture that exists within these people and these processes, these rituals, there isn't a desire to preserve place. And this ties to the idea that the home is the focus of Orthodox Judaism. That what happens in the home practices, the religious practices around the home are the focus. So what do we preserve? We preserve our home traditions, we preserve our home rituals, we preserve our expectations of our children to have a bar mitzvah, to keep Shabbat, to keep kosher, all of those things. That's what we preserve. We don't need to preserve this neighborhood around us. Why do we need to be worried about that? And that's how we see Orthodox urbanity, really urban processes like walking one day a week. I mean, sometimes I tell people, you know, there's one day a week I never step into a car. And it shocks them. You don't drive in the Metroplex one day a week? What are you talking about? But there are a lot of urban practices that Orthodox Jews engage in, such as living in dense communities, walking, different kind of ways that we stay urban, even when we're in suburban spaces. Because if the locus is around our material culture and our rituals, it doesn't really matter where we are. We can have a shul in a suburban strip mall, and it doesn't really matter that the rest of the suburban strip mall is all stores and other things that are open that day. The only thing that matters to us is the shul. Ritual urbanism, right? So, for example, Sephardic Torah Center in far north Dallas is in a suburban strip mall area where there's a bunch of stores that are open there as well. But to the people who go there, it doesn't really matter. I'm here to go to Sephardic Torah Center. That's the only reason I'm in this strip mall, is to go to that synagogue. So we maintain that urbanity even in suburban places because of that ritual urbanism and that focus on wherever I am, that's where my community is, and that's the only thing I need to preserve. But then we have what we call the community ecology lens. And so this is again what Deborah heard in my earlier talk. It's a little bit of a difficult topic, so I'm gonna take it slow because I need to call myself out a little bit here too. So sometimes communities go through phases. And when communities go through phases, there are a lot of incentives for you to either erase or preserve various things from different phases. Now, I have to give a general disclaimer here. I am Chabad. So when I talk about this, I want you to know that I am Lebovits and part of the problem. So we're going to get into this, but I don't want to misidentify myself as being somewhat out of this. So there's different phases the Orthodox community has gone through here. And even though, like I said, it's built out of machlokas, it was built out of those fights and new institution building and creating this Talmud Torah and this Hebrew school and these other, this one was Orthodox and now it's conservative, and this one is Orthodox and stayed Orthodox, and this one closed and that one opened, right? So there's all of that, and that's all going on. But also at the same time, there's a lot of mass assimilation. There's a lot of people who just stop identifying as Orthodox, stop practicing as Orthodox, and while the Orthodox community, literally it is a chain that was maintained from the time Orthodox Jews first came here, and I don't want there to be any belief that it wasn't. It dwindled, got really small, got a little bigger, got small, got bigger. So this community, it goes through this phase where a lot of religious norms shift to non-Orthodox behaviors. So people either leave Orthodoxy entirely, or you get what we call Southern Orthodox, which is like, they call themselves Orthodox, but they'll drive on Shabbat, things like that. So there are different forms of Orthodoxy that occur, but broadly, it doesn't look like Orthodoxy in New York, right? It doesn't look like Orthodoxy in some of these big Orthodox communities. And so the community sort of shifts and molds into its own version of Orthodoxy. But then we have phase two, which is the revival of Orthodox practice, but it comes with a new face of Orthodoxy. So this new revival, which I would say here in Dallas broadly began in 1980 or the early 1980s, involves people coming from other places outside of Dallas, specifically for the express purpose not of leading an existing congregation, but of starting new congregations to bring people closer to the faith. So we call this outreach, or kiruv, or Chabad, it's called shluchus. And so you go out to these other communities with the express purpose of bringing people who were not already religious, not already Orthodox, into Orthodoxy. Not maintaining and building the Orthodoxy that there is, but creating almost a new face of Orthodoxy. And many of these people come from New York, and this new face of Orthodoxy, it's not Southern Orthodox, it's not even a version of Southern Orthodox, it's New York Orthodoxy that comes here with the express purpose of creating a very similar Orthodox environment. I just have to take a drink 1 second. Let it sink in, let everybody nod. So, in this new phase of Orthodoxy, you have two things happening at the same time. First, you have people who had no prior connection to Orthodoxy coming into the Orthodox community and understanding Orthodoxy as being a very specific thing that does not necessarily match what the Orthodoxy was in that place historically. So you have folks who, I give the example of Mrs. H. I was actually at a Sukkot meal with her, and she is a Balas Tshuva. She's a woman who previously was not connected to Orthodoxy and then joined an Orthodox community. And she said to me, there was no Orthodoxy in Dallas before Data came here. Before 1990, there was nothing. And so I said to her, it was that dramatic, it really was, I have to be honest. And I said, oh really, there was no Orthodoxy? And she said, I remember I had to make my first Seder. It was the first time I had to make the Seder in the family. I did not know how to make a Seder. My family was never religious. We only did, one Passover Seder, and that was pretty much it. But it was my turn, and I had no idea. And then I got a postcard in the mail, and it said that these rabbis would teach me how to do a Seder at the JCC. And I came to the JCC, and I saw all these men in black hats and black suits, and they taught me how to do a Seder. There was no Judaism in Dallas before that. That's what she said to me. So then I said to her, well, I'm pretty sure that Akiba Academy, which is an Orthodox Jewish day school, started in the 1960s. And this woman, who is in her 60s, looked at me and goes, oh, no one sent to Akiba, it was too religious. So there's a lot of folks who come into this new Orthodox community who previously were completely outside of Orthodoxy, saw Orthodoxy as extremist, religious, too crazy, why would you send there? And then when they come, they have a revisionist history of what Orthodoxy is, or what Orthodoxy was. They have a sense that there was no Orthodoxy until Data sent them a postcard inviting them for a Seder practice at the JCC. And so that's the first thing that happens in phase 2. But the second thing that happens is that in this new version of Orthodoxy, it's completely disconnected from the prior versions that were local. And so this new version can be, in some ways, more extreme, or more intense, or take on new forms and new identities that do not match what the community already had, again reinforcing this idea that there was no Orthodoxy before. So because Akiba didn't teach you how to do a Seder event, there was no Orthodoxy here. That's what Orthodoxy is. Orthodoxy is outreach, Orthodoxy is all of that. Another interesting story in this is that my children actually go to Torah Day School, and we love it, and we're very happy there. And someone at the school who was involved in the initial, it's a breakoff school from Akiba. Akiba used to be the only Orthodox day school, and then Torah Day School began about 20 years ago. And a woman who was initially part of this breakoff, when I asked her, what were some of the reasons why they created Torah Day School? So, and I was Orthodox my entire life, and I've gone to Orthodox day schools my entire life. And she says to me, well, they were going to teach oral Torah. They were going to teach Mishnah to the girls at Akiba. And I said, at my Orthodox school you learn Mishnah? I didn't understand why she was so concerned about it, but it's because this new phase of Orthodoxy comes with certain norms that are different than what already existed in Orthodoxy, to the point that the new Orthodox individuals see the existing Orthodox base as almost not being Orthodox at all. So again, there's that reinforced incentive. Then we have phase 3, which is that these revisions and this deprioritization of this history leads to people believing that only their future, right, only their pathway as it's continuing is going to be worth preserving. And that the historic pathways and the links in the chain that came before them are actually just like almost completely outside. It's almost not even from, as we might say, right? It's almost not even connected to me. It's as if they were reform. Oh goodness. But I'm just being, just in jest. But there's this idea that it's almost a completely different entity, a completely different version. And so this is like the ecology that happens in the natural environment. We see natural environments where they sort of die out or they shift so dramatically. A new environment comes in that, even though it's built on the foundation of what was already there, and it would not exist without what was already there, right? Torah Day School would not exist if Akiba didn't exist. The two are codependent, right? But there's somehow this idea that this new ecology, this new environment that's there is completely new, completely separate, unlike anything there was before. No Orthodox Judaism here before 1990. I laugh, especially because I knew about South Dallas before I knew about North Dallas. So, where do these streams meet? Where do these two pieces intersect? Where do these three areas intersect? I want to give a couple examples that I think show where different pieces come together and why we can think about the challenges that we see today in preserving Orthodox history. So one of them that we see, this is a connection of what we might call the community ecology, so that's the third stream, and the political economic stream. So one of those examples is the fact that today, and I told you I'm Chabad, so I'm allowed to talk about my own people. Today there are a lot of Chabad outposts in further out parts of the Metroplex. We have Allen, Plano, McKinney, Frisco, all of these areas where Jews have, because of political economic shifts, they've moved further and further and further out. We see that community ecology process happening in those places too. We see Chabad going out to those places and sort of creating Judaism in those places as if there was never anything here before, and these are sort of islands and outposts almost in rural back east Texas, right? For their perspective, that's almost what it is. and creating this brand new community of Judaism disconnected from anything they've ever seen. So that's where we can see some of the streams meet. Another example is the JFS resale shop in Richardson. So I have been there several times because I like to donate a lot of things. And every time I go there, so it's in Richardson, so again, that's that political economic shift, right? Where JFS now is, where we sort of think of the community, has moved much more north. But in the resale shop, you won't see a lot of, Jewish history as far as maps or other sort of historical items. You'll see a lot of mezuzahs, you'll see a lot of candlesticks, see a lot of menorahs. So that's that material culture. That's what people think to preserve, or that's what people think JFS probably wants. They don't want our home's old deed in South Dallas. They want our old menorah. That's what we're going to give over to the next generation. So that's where we see, again, that political and economic and that material culture happening right before our eyes. Another example, and this actually is the material culture and community ecology. Remember how I was mentioning that Goose Valley was in the north, then we had Deep Elm, then you had South Dallas. So today, we see that almost recreated exactly in the Orthodox community with a Plano, far North Dallas, and North Dallas, where again, North Dallas is really the established community, just like South Dallas was at that time. Far North Dallas and Plano are less expensive areas where more people are coming and they're just kind of getting settled. And North Dallas, far North Dallas, and Plano has far more Baalei Tshuva communities, has far more people who have come renewed to Judaism, or to Orthodox Judaism, I should say, than the North Dallas area. So we sort of see that same exact pattern happening, but with a new community ecology, a new material culture. So those are some examples where we can see those streams interacting together. And again, with all three of those examples, what's not being preserved? This old Dallas Orthodox Jewish history. It's still not there. It's not being represented. You can't see it. It's not coming out clearly. Now, there are some critiques of these streams. And the reason I critique myself is to let you all further critique me too. It's how we learn. So one of the critiques of these streams is the fact that, honestly, a lot of history just isn't preserved. Right? So is it really a new or odd phenomenon that Orthodox Jewish history in Dallas isn't preserved? I mean, DJHS should be 4 times its size if everyone really preserved things as well as they should. Let's go DJHS. But really, I mean, there's just a lot that people don't preserve. We aren't as focused on preserving our history as we should be. So is it really due to some mass phenomenon that Orthodox Jewish history isn't preserved? Do we really need to talk about this? Do we really need to care about this? People just generally live their lives and sell their homes and move on. We don't all, I mean, except for me, because I'm a weirdo, we don't all archive every day of our lives and try to find somewhere to put things so that in the future someone can read our diaries or our correspondences with named Jewish experts of the day or whatever it is, right? Most of us just don't do that. So maybe it's not so odd that Orthodox Jews didn't do that as well. Another critique is the fact that it doesn't really, this whole concept doesn't fully engage, and it's a shortcoming in general, I think, of our history, with the massive changes that happened in immigration after World War II. It massively shifted, even before the Baal Teshuva movement, the immigration shifts after World War II of so many Eastern European Orthodox Jews coming into this country, particularly when immigration was suspended right before World War II, right? So we had a period where we didn't have a lot of immigration and then a massive number of Eastern European immigrants coming. That really changes the community in general, right? Aside from, religious institutions and sort of shifting religious norms, there's just a massive change when new people come to a community. The Galveston Project also led a lot of people into Texas. We have a massive shift after the creation of the State of Israel in Sephardi Jews coming to Texas, also with their own Orthodox Jewish norms. Jews from Iran, many Jews from Iran that we have in our community today. So there are a lot of reasons why Jews come and go and preserve and don't preserve. And so maybe these really aren't very important and we should just focus on helping Jews who come here resettle and find good lives and move forward. And I think those are really strong critiques because we really do need to make a pressing argument for preserving history. Maybe it shouldn't be that way, but the reality is most people just live their lives and try to be good, especially good Jews, good to each other, good people in general, and we just move on. And so good Americans, and we have to make a strong argument for preserving our history, our personal history, identifying our history as important. So that leads us right into preparing today for tomorrow's historical preservation. So when I was a kid, there were, my father somehow had these VHS tapes of all of these like World's Fair sort of things. He brought them from when he was a kid into our home. Interesting things my father enjoyed. And so I used to watch these like videotapes of these World's Fairs and these really cool ideas that people had in the 20s and 30s of where the future was going. And many of them today we haven't seen come to fruition at all. And instead we have iPhones, which apparently are so important. But so we have a lot of these concepts of big things that happen today that seem huge, and they are going to lead for the future, but we have no concept of sort of going backwards. How do we start from today and move back? And so I actually have asked this of many archivists and historical preservation experts who I know. How do we start from today and go backwards? It's very easy for people to start from today and go forward. Really hard to go back. And what I've heard is a consensus, and I actually think about this a lot as someone who's originally from Pittsburgh, and for whom the tragedy at Tree of Life was fundamental to my identity and has been over the last couple of years. How do we continue to look back when naturally historical events just don't seem as big, they don't seem as important as time goes on? And the consensus I've heard is that we need to find ways that the things we do every day actually are built on a foundation of our history. And it has to be an active effort, and it has to come from the idea that history is more than just numbers. It's not just about how many people were where, how many buildings were built when. It's about lived experiences. And it's not just about, oral histories of individuals, but it's about histories of communities and thinking about interactions and how things happen and why they happen and when they happen. And asking people not just, where did you grow up and where did you live and this and that, but why did your family do this? Why did your family do that? And finding those intersections and starting today, because the longer we wait, the less fresh our history is. And so I talk to my kids about this all the time because they love taking my phone and taking videos of themselves. And I tell them, that's fine, but just know I'm putting them in an archive and everyone's going to know how goofy you were at 8 and 6 years old. And so thinking about that, thinking about every time that we take a moment, that we capture a moment, every time that there's a community event and we have those pictures of that community event, where are those going to go? Where are we going to put those? And how are we going to contextualize those as being connected to history? So not just keeping them in our synagogue archives, but thinking about, for example, I was actually just in this room a couple of weeks ago for the historic first annual dinner of the Beaker Cholim of Dallas, an organization that supports folks who are in the hospital, folks who are in need of any kind of medical emergency or medical needs. They had the first annual dinner here. But the thing is, Beaker Cholim and visiting the sick and helping people who are in need and who are, connected to hospitals is not new for Dallas. It's a new agency, but historically there was a whole East Dallas neighborhood built around the hospital. Even in the 1920s, there was a whole East Dallas Jewish neighborhood built around the hospital, and people would come into the hospital to provide services and to help. There were, homes for the sick, homes for the elderly. We've been doing this for so many years. So when that event is captured and archived, is it connected to our history as Jews of Dallas? Or is it seen as an event that happened at Shari Tefillah on February whatever, or March whatever, right? It means taking events that we have that happen today and connecting them backwards. And so, just some last thoughts because we are good on time. I am so proud of myself. So, just overall, I think that hopefully what we've done today is really investigate this concept, think more deeply about this concept, introduce a couple of new ideas to you all that maybe you'll go home and think about and talk about and kibitz about over Nash and all of that. But I want more broadly for us to think about not just Orthodox Jewish history, but the entire tapestry of Jewish history in this city. It is so rich. It is so interesting. I really did want to move to South Dallas after I read all of that. It's really fascinating what's happened in this community and how Jews have been a part of so many different things. But thinking about it as naturally intersecting and always connected to one another. So even when we talk about Orthodox Jewish history, it is so connected to Reform Jewish history, and conservative Jewish history, and broad Jewish history, and Orthodox Jews who are business leaders, who are connected to other Jews who are business leaders. Just making sure that we really reinforce those lines of connection. Because unfortunately, the biggest concern that I have in this community is that as this community ecology shifts, as political economic shifts happen, as material cultural shifts happen, we're pulling further and further away from each other. Instead of seeing ourselves as a unified Jewish community, we're seeing ourselves as different subsects of the community, and different sections and different portions and different interests, when ultimately at the end of the day, we are all Jews and we are all in this together. And I want to leave everybody off with one additional thought, which is that I am a member of the Chevra Kadisha. And so I am one of the people who prepares Jewish women's bodies for burial after they've passed away. And it's very meaningful work for me and very important work. And we go anywhere we are called. We have done services for we went out to Corsicana, Texas, because a woman requested a burial service out there, a Jewish woman. And so when I think about Jewish history, I also think about the fact that I very often interact with Jews who have passed, who have, thank God, many of them have lived 80 or 90 years. They've lived Jewish lives in Dallas. And the one thing I get to do for them is help them on to transition to the next stage. But we'll have people who are, converts from Reform. We have people who are conservative folks who are fourth generation Texans. We have everybody from every spectrum, and we treat everyone with dignity. And if we can think about Jews who have passed, who have left their histories, and that same dignity that we owe them, and that same honesty that we owe them to really preserve their lives and preserve their history, I think we will be monumental for this community. So thank you all very much. That is it for me. And like I said, here's my email address. Please email me. Please don't yell at me over email. It sounds very mean. But if you want to yell at me, call me. Then I can tell what your tone is. But please feel free to email me, share your thoughts. I love collecting oral histories. I love learning more about people's experiences. And I just want us all to be invested in this and to continue to see this as important. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
You mentioned about oral histories right at the end. So
Yes.
what % of your research do you think is based on those primary resources of oral history?
So anything at DJHS that's been available, I've listened to. Anything that we can access that, I've actually listened to a lot of histories from other communities too. In UT Arlington, we have several actually architecture professors who do oral histories of various neighborhoods in Dallas and in Arlington. And so whenever I can access those to our UTA archives, I do listen to those and emphasize those as well. A lot of my research has also been focused on quantitative data. So we have a lot of data, census data and things like that about where Jewish communities have gone. We have pictorial data or image data, what we might call qualitative GIS data. So we can use like mapping software to look at how people have shifted and how things have changed. And a lot of it has been lived oral history. So people I've talked to just throughout my last 3 years of living here, who have shared different snippets of what they experienced and what they went through, and just trying to write them down and keep them. And much of my job as a social scientist is to think about broader theories outside of just what we're seeing and connecting what we see to those broader theories, right? So not just looking at the what that comes in a lot of oral histories, but that why from that theoretical lens. But yeah, so and if we could have more oral histories, that would be amazing. As many as possible, hundreds, thousands, right? I mean, just let every person tell their story. Why not? We learn so much more. They're amazing data points. Yes, gentleman here, and then, I'm sorry, the woman back there. Yeah, sure.
Okay, I'm just curious, do you teach that subject in Arlington? Are they
Okay, so I secretly am a Jewish studies professor. And what I mean is that I actually teach government, public policy, and urban planning courses. But I insert Jewish identity and Jewish history into every single one of them. And I actually have recently applied for a grant to kind of do that more at the institutional level, because, I mean, personally I think my identity is an important part of who I am and what I know and what I think about. But because of this lack of sort of preservation of Jewish histories, and because of this broad idea that sort of Jews are white or have assimilated into whiteness or kind of captured in a white narrative, I very strongly push against that, and I provide a lot of information from Jewish perspectives to my students. It's actually funny you say that because we had a conversation recently in our faculty about representation, just making sure that our faculty is as whole as it should be in terms of not just personal identity, but viewpoints. We're very strong in viewpoint diversity. And I mentioned something about being Jewish, and a professor sort of like knocked that off as like, you're basically white. And I said, well, do you want to know how much Yiddish I use in my classes? Like, do you want to know how much I talk about being Jewish all the time? And so I do very much integrate it. I would love, there's actually a Texas Jewish triangle. So there's a couple Jewish universities between Houston, Dallas, Arlington, and Austin and San Antonio. And some of us professors meet regularly to talk about integrating Jewish studies and Jewish ideas into various classes. But I wish I could do more. We just don't really have a designated program for it. And unfortunately, the way things are going, it looks like things like Jewish studies are gonna diminish even more here in Texas. Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
I'm Victor Altamite. I'm a native of Dallas. I was born in the late 50s. And I could just say right now, as a kid in the 60s, I think there was self-erasure. I mean, we didn't think about South Dallas, and that was 60 years ago, 50 years ago. It was Temple Emmanuel on Northwest Highway, to Ferret on Royal Lane, and Sheriff Israel on Douglas. And then it became Shalom.
And the stop for one.
Yeah, I didn't remember that one, but I remember those three. So I think there was self-erasure. I think you touched about in your lecture about racism and the North was better. And, it really would be a great thing to try to reconnect that. And it's probably harder now than it was in the 60s. And I also want to say that, in the last few months, Temple Emmanuel has done a big campaign for their 150th.
Mm-hmm.
And they've had some historians talk about stuff. So maybe as part of your work, maybe you can connect with them.
Yeah, I connected with the rabbi there because they have a lot of really interesting archives, and we've been looking at where we can tell like stories of Reform and Orthodox Judaism together. First name, Stern. Okay. This is what happens when you know people by first names.
And then my last question, just sort of a question, I don't know if Ferret would sort of have been the logical connector to that, because they were sort of Orthodox.
And then became conservative.
Yeah. But I mean, would they have a close connection or go back?
It was what?
It was essentially one of the more or less traditional synagogues.
Traditional, yeah, that's what they call it.
And now it's
Traditional.
modern
And then
Orthodox.
it went, and then with the establishment of Rabbi Sabo as the new.
It went
rabbi,
to modern Orthodoxy.
to modern Orthodoxy.
Yeah, but traditional. Yeah.
It started out
It
as.
started out as Orthodox, and then it went to traditional or Masorati. Sorry to use conservative, but yes, more Masorati. And then it has gone to modern
But
Orthodox.
Ferret was there in the 60s, so I
Yeah.
don't know if that has any connection back to before that, which I think is what you're talking about.
Tver was there long before the 60s. I mean, I think, sorry, I wrote all these numbers and dates down because, yeah, it was the second, yeah.
Where it is now, is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, in Goose Valley. So see, this is why I have notes. So it began in Goose Valley, and then it actually moved further south, and then it moved back up north.
So, many of Evan Rose's house, I'm a fourth generation Dallasite. My kids are sixth generation members of the Jewish community. And the reason why I'm so familiar with Shtetel is if you go to the Chili Cook-Off, my great-great-grandfather's mugshot is the first president on the wall. Frank Myers. So, and you go, one of the kind of neat ones is there's actually a book of Dallas Jewish history called They Came to Stay.
Yep.
Great reading for anyone who's interested. But, it's kind of interesting to see, you talk about the ebb and flow of Orthodoxy, and one thing that I remember is, my grandfather at one point looks at me, he goes, and he was born in Dallas, his grandfather started Self-Erasure. He himself my great-great-grandfather was the first rabbi de facto, was the Shtetel, de facto in Wales, and the president of the school at the time. My grandfather himself couldn't care, for the most part, could not care about Jewish practice. But you see, all three of his kids all kept Jewish identity. His three grandsons all kept Jewish identities. Now all happen to be members of Orthodox Jewish communities. At least all this, it's kind of an interesting ebb and flow that you see throughout Moses.
Yeah, throughout the 20th century, right? That sort of ebb and flow of different families, even in the same family, right? Different things that have happened through the same family. Yes, over here. Thank you for nodding. I just have to, yeah.
Because you're a sociologist as well. Why do you preserve buildings? I think the sociology of that is that so many of the people who have come and moved and come, and this is not just Jewish, are here on the basis of surviving their bodies, coming back alive from somewhere, so that if they were able to be successful to survive, and then survive differently, that would be an expectation, and not that they would feel that they have to preserve the building that sheltered them on their way into the world,
Yeah.
into the American world. So I think if you can add that other layer of what drove those people, besides simply being, it's really that they survived.
Yeah, and it's like that intersection of material culture and political economics, right? Is that my sense of being Jewish is my body is Jewish, myself. It's so tied within me, and so wherever my body goes, that's where Jewish goes. I don't need to take care of this building or this neighborhood because I'm here to preserve, especially coming from Eastern Europe, where their bodies were being attacked for being Jewish.
Or Germany,
Mm-hmm.
from Asia.
Mm-hmm.
We have populations from all over the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so I think
Refugees. Exactly. Yes, definitely. Sure, there's a question back here. Yes, this man.
Yes, I'm confused. You teach at a public university, or is it a religious school?
No, I teach at UT Arlington. It's a public university.
Public university.
Yeah.
And in your class, what is the title of your class?
So I teach different classes. I teach ethics and public policy, qualitative research, introduction to public policy, community development, urban planning, all of these.
Okay, and in those classes, you discuss Judaism?
No, in those classes I take concepts from Jewish history and Jewish community development. So let's say, for example, if I'm giving an example in my qualitative research class, I'm talking about oral histories. I might have my students listen to an oral history that's provided by the DJHS. They can listen to any oral history, but I choose to provide an oral history that gives them some information about the Jewish history in Dallas. Or if we're doing like I said, a qualitative GIS analysis. We're taking different pictures of different places and we're mapping them. I could pick any neighborhood, but I picked Goose Valley, something like that. So I try to integrate some of this knowledge, especially in my ethics and public policy class. I use a lot of Jewish ideas of ethics as well as other group ideas of ethics. I mean, I integrate it. It's not a Jewish class, but there's 16 weeks worth of content. There's a lot of stuff coming in every class, and each class is 4 hours. So there's a lot going on, and I do try to bring my full identity to that experience. Not from a religious lens, just these are things that shape me and these are things that interest me, and as they integrate with our class, that's one of the pathways that we talk about.
And you don't discuss other religions in there?
I do. Yeah. Oh, of course. I mean, we have a huge Muslim population at UT Arlington, and we talk a lot about Muslim practices, and students offer a lot of their insight. We're a Hispanic serving institution. We talk a lot about Latino practices. I integrate all of it. Like I said, it's a lot of content. But when I have an opportunity to highlight something that's uniquely Jewish, I do try to bring that to the table as well.
There's been no objections or feedback because of the separation of state and religion?
Not from my students. I've never heard that from anybody because a lot of it is about, and I set the stage when I begin, I teach graduate level courses. So I teach master's and doctoral level. And so a lot of when I set the stage when we start our courses is that we all have a lot to learn from one another, and our personal life experiences, it really determine a lot of the ways that we analyze and investigate information. And so I expect them to bring from their personal lives as well. Not only do we have a huge Muslim population, we have a very large immigrant population in our school as well. So people from a lot of other countries. I mean, it's very well integrated. It's not forced on them or anything, or it's not go be Jewish.
Okay.
No. Also, we don't proselytize, so it's not my shtick to like go out and like try to bring people into Judaism. But I just mean as much as I can integrate different understandings, particularly as I'm investigating them, then my students, I actually did a project, I had a recent qualitative research methods class, and I did a project on using image data. And I took a bunch of, from a different research project I did, I took a lot of pictures from commercial areas in Jewish neighborhoods in New York. And I had my students analyze them because many of them have never been to New York. So it's a whole different perspective. They're not familiar with Jewish neighborhoods. And it was really funny how many of them noticed the garbage in the streets. They kept talking about there being so much garbage on the streets of New York. So things like that. But it's not about, you know, go be Jewish or I'm teaching religion. Not at all. Yeah.
You mentioned that when you go to the thrift shop, the Jewish Family Service thrift shop, which sadly is going to be no more,
Yeah, I know.
that the things that people donate often are these ritual objects. And I'm curious, having had the experience of going to a number of like estate sales and garage sales and finding the same thing, why do you suppose people, rather than passing them down or giving them to something like the Dallas Jewish Historical Society, because that's what we do, donate them to thrift shops or things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you can answer that question better than I can, but I think I would say, first of all, there are many people whose children have moved out of the area, they don't necessarily have strong connections with their children, or their children are no longer practicing Judaism in the same way they did. I also think a lot of things are donated by children after someone passes away, and they've decided that's not important and they want to give it to a thrift shop. So estate planning is very important, everyone, because really, end-of-life planning in general, I strongly encourage for everybody, because when children or grandchildren sort of come to get rid of things in the estate, they're putting everything in a bunch of garbage bags and sending them to one spot. They're not necessarily thinking about, well, this should go here or this should go there. So I think that's very often why it happens and how it happens. And if to the child that menorah is not important or those candlesticks aren't important, then we're just going to give them to the JFS, you know, shop.
It won't be important to them until they're in their 50s or 60s.
Yeah, until they have kids and grandkids and they want to celebrate Hanukkah all together, it's hard. It's a struggle.
Be able to say, these are my grandmother's candlesticks.
Right, or they may have a newer version, but I think that means also they don't really appreciate the one they grew up with, or it's not as nice. And I get, like, that kind of, you know, goes to the community ecology aspect too, where we have, like, in this new kind of aesthetically dramatic, I want to say, orthodoxy, where there's a lot of materialism in a lot of orthodoxy today, you know, having an old rusted brass mezuzah isn't something I want because I want a pretty silver and mahogany wood mezuzah or something like that, you know. So I think there's a lack of appreciation sometimes for those ritual objects, even if you have the same ones at home. Yes?
Well, bringing that up, you know, Dallas as a whole doesn't believe in preserving things.
Yeah.
It's like you have to tear it down, rebuild, tear it down, you know, and it has to be the newest, like you said, shiniest thing moving forward.
And it needs a pool. It always has to have a pool. How dare you not have a pool?
and I, you know, I grew up there also, I was born and raised here, and it's like, what is the deal? And that thing is preserved or saved, and so, you know, it's just such a sad, I think, commentary on Dallas itself.
Yeah, absolutely. In my free time, so much of it, I am a metalsmith, and I work with precious metals mostly, a lot of sterling silver. And so one of the things that I find really interesting is that when you fire up sterling silver in order to do various things with it, it gets sort of there's a little bit of a shine, but there's also a grime in there. And then you have to put it in a chemical solution called pickle to clear off that grime. But when you pull it out of the pickle, it's almost frosted. It doesn't look shiny anymore. So then you have to wash it. And then you got rid of the grime and you have the shine. And I think there's something about Dallas where the second we fire up something and it gets that little bit of grime, we're like, oh, we just have to throw it out. We don't put it in the pickle, we don't wash it, we don't go through the steps that we need to do. We just kind of toss it out because we need to be a Gildan city. And the moment we're not like bright and shiny, there's no use for it. So that's why when I say that critique also, I think there is sort of something about this place in general that people just don't preserve. Yeah?
I don't think it's just Dallas or Texas. I think a lot of it's generational, where my kids are in their 30s and 40s, and they don't want extra stuff. And it's a disposable generation.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of them don't go to the DJHS because they don't know about it.
Yeah.
And it's up to us as this generation to say, if you don't want this stuff, then send it here. A lot of people just don't know that. So you're just getting the word out. Because otherwise, they don't want the stuff. They're going to call a company that just does the estate sale, pass it off, and they're not really, it's up to us to encourage that.
Estate planning, really, I mean, leave your things to the DJHS. Put things in, my grandparents, my father, like I said, my father grew up in LA, and my grandparents no longer live in Los Angeles. My grandmother passed, my grandfather lives in New York, but they still have their house. And a couple years ago, I got into the house. It was really difficult. There was like all these, like this person has a key, but then that person has a lock. There's like all these ways that they're trying to preserve the house. And I got in and I found that my grandmother had preserved several newspapers, and included in that, she had the original LA Times from when Kennedy was shot in Dallas. And so even things like that, preserving newspapers, preserving these real experiences, yeah, putting them in good plastic, saving all them. What I really wanted was all of her outfits, but I could not bring those back. As it is, I mostly shop at vintage stores, not for something like this, but for my fun, hip outfits. But she, and so you have people who thought that way, right? The day a major event happened, they saved, they preserved, and they told their kids, I want this, I need this. So we need to be active in it as well.
I think we've had one more question.
Okay. Oh, yeah, sorry.
That's okay. So you mentioned, and it's definitely something we're aware of at the Dallas Jewish Historical Society, that we don't have a lot of the Orthodox history. How would you suggest as a solution to that? Like, how do we go about making that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like this woman said, some of it is education. Educating people that this history is worth preserving, worth thinking about how we go backwards, where we came from, that chain. But I think a lot of it ultimately, the struggle with historic preservation when it comes to preserving community histories is that it needs to be co-produced, which is to say, you can't find out someone passed away and force your way into their home and steal their stuff, right? They need to willingly give it, they need to be engaged. And so I think regularly having conversations in community institutions about this, regularly providing that knowledge is really important, but also providing, and I've had conversations like this with some people, almost like a starter pack. Like what could we take? What would we be interested? Like, handing out little information like that. Someone passed away, especially to like the funeral homes. If your relative passed away, here's a pamphlet for, along with all these other things, here's ways that you can preserve things. Again, I mean, I see people who passed away at 80, 90 years old and they lived in Dallas or in Texas their whole lives, and I don't know what ever happened to their stuff. Who knows? But the funeral homes are a place to do that. Schools are a place to do that. So I mentioned my kids go to Torah Day School. They're celebrating their 20-year anniversary. And I just asked them straight, how are you preserving your history besides number of children that have been in classes over the last 20 years? There's different ways to preserve your history. There's different important artifacts of your history. So I think people don't know where to start. People don't know where to go moving forward, but especially when people's parents pass away, they're just, like we said, they just hire a company, they just truck it all out, they're done with it, over. So getting in at that moment can be really important and really significant. And I mean, I try to talk to people about it. It's not really my role as a Chaver Kadisha member to go there. But whenever there's a possibility, I do try to tell people, if there's something worth preserving, contact the Historical Society, contact, an institution that can take it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. That was truly amazing, and we definitely need to talk about you getting more involved with the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. We'd like to have you be with us on more events. I'm Rhonda Deachin. I am one of the executive board members of the Dallas Jewish Historical Society, and encourage everyone, if you have not done your oral histories, to please do so. and encourage all family members and also the institutions that you are also members of to do it as well. We do have availability to become a member, as low as $100 and up to become a trailblazer, and we would love to have you join us that way. We do have some great programming coming up. I don't have the sheet, but I know, all of our great programs that we have. Yay! So, our next thing is on April 27th, Save the Day. So, it's the life and times of Jim Schwartz, who was a past president who passed away 5 years ago. An amazing young man. I like to say we're all young, right? But anyway, it's going to be a great program. It's only $20, and we hope you'll join us there. It's at Anshe Torah. And also, before I forget, I want to thank Shari Tefila for hosting this event. We do appreciate the collaboration between other organizations as we bring about the Dallas Jewish Historicals programming to the city. And then just grab the sheet on the way out, and you'll get to see all the great programs.